Good evening and welcome to a meeting of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee of the town of Corte Madera. Special meeting Thursday, January 20th, 2022. Let's begin with a salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and roll call. Maybe we just do it. Everyone says their name. I'm Bob Ravazio. Hello.
David McPherson.
Mark Madden.
Cheryl Longinati.
Herbie Bartlett.
Okay, I think that's the whole committee that's here tonight, right? RJ, great.
Yep.
Okay, and we have an urgency action first, which is to approve the meeting by remote teleconference and adopt the following findings. RJ, do you want to talk about this a little bit, or this is a standard item? We're doing it all over.
Standard item. If we haven't met in the last 30 days, we need to allow this to proceed as a virtual meeting.
Okay. Are there any questions from BPAC on this? Are there any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Does it require a motion?
Yeah, we're going to need, but first I have to ask if there's any public comment on this. Hang on, I need to pull the attendees up. Okay, I don't see any hands raised. So is there a motion on the urgency action?
I'll move that the urgency actions for remote meetings be voted on.
Second.
Okay, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Urgency action is approved. Minutes of the September 8th, 2021 meeting were distributed. Are there any comments or correction? Are there any corrections to the minutes from BPAC members? No? Okay. Then I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Go ahead and move that the minutes from the prior meeting be approved.
And is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, minutes are approved. Okay, and let's go to open time for the public now. This is regarding items that are not on the agenda. The agenda was distributed earlier. So is there any member of the public who wishes to speak about something that is not on the agenda? If so, raise your hand and we will attempt to bring you on. Okay, I don't see anyone with a hand up. So we will close public comment and we will move right into the discussion that everyone is here for, which is about the Paradise Drive corridor. And RJ, I'm going to turn this over to you. I know you've been working on this for weeks and our consultants have too. So
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ravazio. So I think we brought up some of our consultants. This is a follow-up to our introductory workshops that we held in November. And I thought I'd start with a quick introduction of our team, and then we've prepared a presentation. So yeah, great, put your videos on. So I'll start with myself, RJ Suko, Director of Public Works. And on my screen, we'll go with Chris.
Chris Good, Senior Civil Engineer with Public Works.
Next, we have John.
Hey, greetings, John Gibbs, Principal at WRT, assisting with engagement, communications, and design issues.
Becky.
I'm Becky Dower with BKF. I'm a civil engineer.
And Poonam. You're muted.
Good evening, Poonam Narkar from WRT, Senior Urban Designer.
Great. And with that, yeah, like I mentioned, we have a brief presentation, and there'll be somewhere in the middle, we're going to stop and ask a round of questions and get feedback from the committee as well as from the public. And then we'll continue through the second part of the presentation. And at the end, we'll also have a similar opportunity. And with that, I'm going to turn over to Chris Good, our Senior Civil Engineer, to kick off the presentation. And then Becky, let me know if you're able to share the presentation.
You know, I'm not able to share. It says my screen
Give it a
is
try now.
All right, success.
Oh,
Okay, great. Thanks, RJ. So as RJ mentioned, we're here to present and discuss the Paradise Drive Complete Street project. Next slide. So just to provide a little background on this project, the goal of the project is to improve or add multimodal facilities to the section of Paradise Drive between Westwood and the eastern town limit in order to enhance access to the roadway for all users. The project border provides access to a few important community assets, including Ring Mountain Open Space, Marin Montessori School, Marin Country Day School, and nearby residential and commercial hubs. The users we're expecting to use these improvements are both adult and child bike riders, pedestrians, visitors to Ring Mountain who will also need parking, and parents in vehicles who are picking up and dropping off for the two schools. On top of that, Paradise Drive is an important emergency services route between Highway 101 and then parts of Corte Madera, Tiburon, and unincorporated Marin County. And then in general, the improvements we're expecting will be enhancements to bicycle and pedestrian facilities, such as bike lanes, sidewalks, and shared use paths. Next slide. So here's the project limits. On the left side of the screen, which is to the west, you can see Westwood Drive is the start. And then we have the trail access to Ring Mountain Open Space, the two schools, Marin Country Day School and Marin Montessori. And then just east of Robin Drive is the eastern town limit, which will be the end of the project. And I will pass it off to RJ.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
So one of the key kind of things we want to focus on today is, we started this Paradise Complete Streets project kind of with the town's bike master plan in mind from 2016, but as part of the initial round of introductory workshops, we've heard some concepts, primarily a potential path on the north side that is contrary to that master plan. And we felt that alone was a significant piece to discuss with BPAC. And so that's one of the things that we'd like to get your feedback on and obviously show you, all the information we have to date so you can make some informed decisions. But really that's one of the overarching goals. And then beyond that, we will also dive into some product specific details. But since the last set of workshops, we have done some right-of-way analysis and existing conditions evaluations for the portion that is from Westward back to our recent, widened sidewalk at San Clemente to really understand what that might look like from a kind of whole comprehensive corridor perspective. And so that'll be part of our presentation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to John Gibbs.
Okay, great. So kind of zeroing in on our goals for this evening, just putting a little finer point on the previous introductions. We got 4 goals. The first 2 really kind of go together and align to our presentation pause, where we'd really like to have a discussion before we move forward with the second half, as RJ had explained. So first goal, receiving input on whether or not the town bicycle and pedestrian master plan should govern the direction of the project. There's some inconsistency there. We need to come back and get some guidance from you guys on that before we can move forward with the project. Goal 2, confirm if the BPAC supports a pathway on the north side of Paradise Drive between Seawolf Passage and Westward. So these are the areas west of the project study that we had just identified before. And how, if at all, the feasibility of this pathway should impact decisions on the current Complete Streets project. So looking in our context, how do we understand that, and how do we see how that affects the project at hand? And likewise, understanding the interim connections and facilities is an important factor to consider until grant funds for future pathway between Seawolf Passage and Westward Drive are secured. So what that means is that if we move forward within the project area on Paradise Drive up near the schools. We build the path on the north side. For a while, we're going to have some inconsistencies. We're going to have sections on the south side, sections on the north side. There's some uncertainty of timeline, the need for getting grants together. And we need to understand how that is going to work in the, for some foreseeable future. That's what that goal is about. We'll pause and really focus in on that first, and then be able to move forward with the other two goals, or goal number 3, identifying what features and facilities should be further studied for inclusion as part of the Complete Streets project. So, get your guys' input on the Complete Streets project at hand. And we're going to share with you some of our progress there. And in particular, goal 4, discuss feasibility of creating what we're calling a flex space to simultaneously accommodate parking and queuing. This is really on the south side shoulder. And how do we treat that should that not be a pathway? We're trying to get a sense of that. We'll get into a little bit more detailed framing as we're moving forward with the creation of alternatives next. Tonight, you're really helping us confirm what are the right alternatives that we should be studying, and making sure we're really zeroing right in on a couple of really good ones. So you'll get some good feedback or good information from us, and hopefully give us some good feedback. Becky is going to talk us through the existing plan and move right into some of the feasibility studies.
Yeah, thank you, John. So as RJ had mentioned a moment ago, when the town and when the consultant team started to visualize what this current Complete Streets project looked like, we naturally went to the town bicycle and pedestrian master plan. This image that we have before you here, this is an excerpt from a larger exhibit in the master plan. And this exhibit was titled The Proposed Bikeway Network. So through this series of colored dashed lines, the authors of the master plan tried to illustrate what they thought the appropriate bicycle facilities would be and where they would be located. So let's dive into this a little bit more as it pertains to our direct project corridor, and then the corridor to the west that the public has expressed some interest in. So starting at Seawolf here, the master plan shows this dashed green line, which this represents a class 1, and it's shown on the north side of Paradise Drive. That spans from Seawolf to just past Prince Royal. You see here at Prince Royal, this solid green line here that runs all the way to Westwood. This is supposed to represent the existing class 1 shared use path that's already constructed on the south side of Paradise Drive. As we move to Westward, Westward being the westernmost portion of our current Complete Streets project, you'll see that the bicycle pedestrian master plan with their dash green line illustrates a class 1 shared use path on the south side of Paradise Drive. So the project team, we have been understanding that we would defer and look to the master plan for guidance. And we have been using this as a baseline for our understanding of the project to date, and also as sort of the guidance for our messaging to the public so far today as well. All right, I'll hand it back to RJ here.
I think this was going to be me. So just in the effort as part of this project, we had a pretty good process, and we did it in over 2 meetings. We had about 50 people attending, especially that second workshop. We got a lot of good feedback, and we really kind of got the word out, I think, pretty successfully. And thanks to many of you for helping out with that process to make sure we reached a nice audience. And so I think in the end, we were really able to do that, and glad. Some of the feedback that we received on the next slide, a couple of key things. These are kind of zeroing in on a couple of key points. And the first being, we really heard from everybody a lot of support for more recreational and school age kid focused bicycle access, and essentially removing that from the street. So putting it onto a shared path, and that was definitely more support for that shared path, like a class 1, as opposed to dedicated class 2 bike lanes. Instead, a widened shoulder and adequate space within the roadway was adequate for many of the cyclists. I think we heard that pretty loud and clear, and I think we want to confirm that tonight. That helps us move forward with our alternatives. We also certainly heard a lot of demand for all the things that happen in the roadway. We had members from from the schools. We had I think a strong voice from the Autobahn. Just understanding there's a lot of things going on this roadway and a lot of needs and a lot of adjacent uses, and we need to be creative within our right of way. So really thinking about how to balance queuing and parking in particular in terms of access to Ring Mountain, staging, maintenance days associated with the Autobahn Marsh in particular. So we heard a lot of really good feedback, and we think there could be some creative ideas that we can come up with. And lastly, just to underscore that limited, the idea of the pathway on the north side of the road, we definitely heard that. So on the Marsh side, and so here we are. We're taking a step back. We've kind of listened to the feedback and are looking outside the current project limits to to really resolve that issue before we can move forward.
So we certainly received lots of popular comments about that pathway on the north side that John was just talking about. A lot of the public, they mentioned that they wanted this path on the north side, and some people provided some justification for that train of thought, primarily citing that they were interested in having a continuous path on the north side for access from the neighborhoods over by Seawolf directly to the schools without having to cross Paradise Drive. And I think the shared use path, according to some of the comments we received, was attractive more so than a bike lane because this could accommodate recreational cyclists or children as well. So despite this, sort of coming at odds with the bicycle and pedestrian master plan that we've been using as our guiding light to this point, the town did hear the public and had directed the consultant team to spend some time analyzing the general feasibility of an 8-foot shared use path on the north side of Paradise Drive. So as part of our analysis, we looked at a few key issues. We had mapped out the right-of-way for the area between Seawolf and Westwood. We'd also identified and located some key utilities such as utility power poles. We've identified some big trees that might be impacted. And then we also got an idea of grading and just general topographic layout of the site. Now, with all projects, there's always challenges. There's always going to be some constraints. And we will talk some specifics about some of those constraints here in just a minute. But in general, from an engineering standpoint, it appears as though construction of this pathway is reasonable on the north side. I do want to point out, though, that, as with any project, this also comes with a price tag, and a very rough initial cost for this project is going to fall, we think, somewhere between 1.5 to 3 million. Now on to some of those opportunities and constraints. This slide here, this focuses on one particular block on this corridor. And so to help you get your bearings here, Prince Royal is to the west or left over here. And Verona Place is off screen, but is opposite the new pathway somewhere down over here. So you can see on this, this sort of street view here, just to help you further get your bearings, this is that existing class 1 pathway on the south side of Paradise Drive, which is also represented over here. These dashed blue lines you see on either side, these represent the right-of-way. So we have ample right-of-way in this location, but we do consider right-of-way to be sort of a hard stopping point, just due to some of the timing and cost implications of trying to get additional right-of-way. So depending on how big your monitor is, you may or may not be able to see this section view here. This shows a clear width between a new curb and existing curb of 28 feet with this 8-foot pathway in place. So what 28 feet can really mean for us is, this is 2 11-foot travel lanes and 2 3-foot shoulders. This is certainly wide enough for 2 vehicle travel lanes and shared use with cyclists. What this is not wide enough for, however, is that 8-foot shared use path, the travel lanes, and dedicated class 2s. Some of the challenges that we have here that I want to point out have to do with grading. First of all, you'll see here on this street view image, there is some sloping that occurs on these fence lines back here. This isn't something that we can't overcome. This would require a retaining wall, which does, again, start to impact that construction cost, and is something that we'd consider. You'll also take note that of the series of utility poles. I have them denoted here in red on this plan view exhibit. So unless you like to, imagine that you're doing a slalom course on your bike, these really negatively impact the use of the pathway as they land right in the middle of where our hypothetical shared use path would go. So either we would sacrifice a little bit of usability with those poles in place, or we look at relocating them again at another cost to the project. Let's move east a bit to talk about another constrained area. So for your bearings, this is Golden Hind over here, and Westwood is off screen to the east over here. This is our most constrained area in terms of right-of-way. So that dashed blue line that we were talking about earlier, you'll see here along the Autobahn frontage, that right-of-way line actually bumps out several feet. What that means for us is if we honor the right-of-way line and we keep the path within the public right-of-way, that our clear width available for vehicle travel or other on-street uses necks down to 22 feet. This is a rather short span of necking. We see probably about 150 feet as we head east of here, that the right-of-way really starts to open up again, and we get a much wider corridor. But for that about 150 feet, we are somewhere down below 28 feet wide and as narrow as 22 feet. So if I were to lay out this hypothetical road section for you again, this really represents 2 vehicle travel lanes with no shoulders. That is still potentially adequate for vehicle travel and for on-street cyclists in a class 3 situation with sharrows. Certainly not adequate for class 2s. This configuration doesn't have a lot of other conflicts other than right-of-way. We're clear of major utilities. There are some vegetation and trees, though, that will be impacted, not just on this segment, but on many of the segments. The trees of note, though, you can see on this image over here, appear to be bay trees, quite large, as well as some vegetation that's behind the residences there.
Great, thanks, Becky. So I wanted to kind of stop for a second, and as we think about what is the ultimate goal, we have to think about sequencing and phasing of kind of how it all looks over the next 10 or so years, getting to that ultimate goal. But this is kind of a similar drawing to the master plan, but has a little more detail in the form of these aerial drawings and kind of highlight certain things that I'd like to point out. So obviously we have this class 1 path here on the south side in between Prince Royal and Westwood, and that's already there. We have on the far left of the screen, and I don't know if you can see my arrow or not, or maybe Becky can point it out. Right there, yeah, we have the sidewalk that we just built. If we were to follow the master plan, we would have really kind of just this one section here between Seawolf Passage and Prince Royal that would more or less be a gap closure. One more section to the left. Now, if we start talking about a north shared path, in addition to what we have in the southern path, obviously now we're talking a much larger section of path that previously hadn't been envisioned by the master plan. And so anytime you have a new facility, you have a new cost. And so that just hasn't been folded into any budgets to date, and definitely is an important thing to discuss and talk about. We took a back of the napkin type estimate. We took the recent work we did on with the 8-foot sidewalk in between San Clemente and Seawolf. We added a little cost for retaining walls, and today's dollars that came in around $2.5–3 million. So it's a big chunk. And really when you look at the trade-offs of the north versus south, I think that's really one of the bigger things to consider, and definitely want you all to think about that as part of your comments today, and kind of helping guide us, which direction this project may go.
So for discussion purposes, and then we can actually pause, and I think there's a procedural question of when we do that with you all. First discussion point we ask your help in is, should the town's bicycle and pedestrian master plan govern the direction of the project, or should a path on the north side of Paradise Drive be explored? And the second discussion point is, does the BPAC, do you all support a pathway on the north side of Paradise Drive between Seawolf Passage and Westward Drive? If it's supported, should this project inform decisions on the current complete streets plan? So if we are electing to recommend this north side pathway in these western reaches outside of our immediate project, should that really then inform what we're doing within our project, which is going to be the second half of this conversation. And then with that, we can turn it back over to the committee for your assistance and your discussion.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for the presentation and all the information. So we will start with questions only from BPAC members, no comments. Then we'll go to public comment because there's a lot of members of the public here, listen to their comments. And then we'll come back to the BPAC for their comment and input. Does that make sense to everybody? Got that? Okay,
Yeah.
so first off, questions for staff from BPAC members. Are there anybody with questions here? Dave McPherson.
Did staff or the consultants consider eliminating the multi-use path that currently exists on the south side to increase the right-of-way if in fact the multi-use path is going to go all the way from town's boundary near Marin Montessori to the existing and new 8-foot path? That's one question. The second question I have is whether or not there has been any written communication, emails between Marin Montessori and the consultants and or town staff since this project has been put on the agenda. Specifically, I want to know if there's any written communications regarding the queuing issue.
Yeah, and I'm happy to field those, Vice Chair McPherson. So on the first one, we definitely did come to consideration of, what does this, if we fit in, say, an 8-foot widened sidewalk or shared path, can we fit it in without moving that curb line? Because really, to me, that is a huge cost if we cannot. Not just because of the curb itself, but if you go out there, there's a grade difference by several feet. And so for me, that would be a bigger challenge to get behind, and the cost would likely at least double. And at the same time, you would lose that facility on the south if you were to go that direction by widening it out. Is it feasibility? Is it feasibility from an engineering standpoint? Yes. But it felt like it was a much more reasonable project if we didn't have to move that curb face or that curb line along the south side at a much higher expense. That answer your question? And then just quickly on the school part, we haven't had any relevant or significant conversations with the school since prior to the last round of workshops. So nothing has changed since I think that question was asked at the introductory workshop. So
if I could just interject, to a degree, we are trying to keep our project and the queuing discussion to the second half of this call, if possible, just because we really want to understand this area. Lots to dig into, and I did see a comment in the chat from Sam as well.
Yeah, I wanted to clarify as well. Yeah, so this is kind of the midpoint in the presentation, and then we'll do a similar feedback and discussion and question round at the end.
Okay. Kirby.
I guess I have a question. We're being asked to whether we should consider a north side sidewalk or pedestrian passageway in thinking about the path on the east. But I guess part of me wonders, have you evaluated options for the east side pathway, the scope of the project? Have you evaluated how hard it is, the options on the north side or the south side, because that might then dictate how we think about the Westward project and whether or not it's worthwhile to build a sidewalk on the western side of the strip. I don't know if I made myself clear there, but I'd like to know how hard it is on both sides, north-south, north-south. Like how hard is it? How much work is it? What's the cost? And then you can understand the trade-off. Is it worth spending the $2.5 million for the western side of Paradise Drive, because doing the eastern side, it's so much more practical to build it on the north side? So have you evaluated those options from north and south on the eastern side? And that makes it easier for me to answer the question proposed in the previous slide.
Do you want to handle that, Becky? I'm not sure I was following the references as well.
Yeah, can I just clarify, Kirby, when you're talking about western and eastern, I'm not sure what you're talking about, and I'm not sure everyone else is either, because we're only talking about north and south sides of the street, and you keep
I
throwing in
understood what
western and
Kirby
eastern.
was saying, and so
Oh,
maybe
good. Okay,
provide
maybe you
some
can
clarity
explain to the
that.
rest of us.
Yeah, because I've been looking at directions for this a long time, so east and west sounded perfectly reasonable to me. The east side, I consider anything east of Westward, so from Westward to the eastern town limit. So that's really like our Complete Streets project limit. And when you hear west, I'm thinking west of Westward. So as we head from Westward to
Yes. So west and east, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So west and east, I get it. That made sense to me. So on the eastern side, on our project side, westward to the, I know it's hard. I see Bob over there. It's hard when the streets even have like directions
Westward.
or names.
On the east side of Westward.
The east side westward. So when we're looking at the segment that is westward to the eastern town limit east,
yes.
We have looked at the feasibility of a pathway on the north side as well as the south side of Paradise. We had primarily focused on looking at the general feasibility on the south side because that was in line with the master plan. But since there are really no pedestrian facilities out there, it's just roadway and a couple of shoulders, we have a lot more opportunity and a lot more flexibility with where we put that pathway. There's also happens to be, in most cases, a little bit wider right of way on that east segment, the one that's by the day school and the Montessori school. So there's a little bit more opportunity just because there's more real estate and there's less built out ground there. So I'd say in general, it's reasonable and feasible to put the path on either the north or the south side when we talk about the eastern segment of Paradise.
Yeah, and let me say maybe something similar, but adding a few things and just a different perspective. Yeah, so the portion, right, our Complete Streets project that goes adjacent to the schools between Westward and Robin Drive. So we already know we have more items on our wish list that we want to put in there than right away we have. So we're gonna really optimize and take all of the available space we have without, getting into the various impacts or challenges. And so really that footprint, whether we go, that overall footprint, whether we put the path on the north or south, I don't think it really changes significantly. And from a cost perspective, I think it's fair to say they're pretty about the same. And, we won't know exactly until we get into all the details, but we have looked at it and it's generally going to be about the same.
Thank you.
So Kirby, that answered your question?
Yes, it did.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from BPAC members? Cheryl? At this point, no? Mark? Okay. I just have one for staff, maybe. Do we have any idea who the primary user of this would be? Is it primarily kids in the neighborhood, or is it actually, we keep talking about getting these all the way down to the schools, but I'm not sure how many of the schools, children from Montessori and Marin Country Day are actually going to be riding their bikes on this. Do we have any idea on that, RJ?
Yeah, and Beck, if you don't mind, go back to the existing conditions and interim connection slide. That reminded me of a kind of discussion point that I meant to bring up. So it's So, and I will respond to your question, Chair Vazio. I see value in the South Class 1 path, and I would have a difficulty recommending that it get removed in kind of any scenario, because really it does connect folks, that live off of Westwood in this neighborhood that otherwise would have to go up a steep hill and go around, or obviously find a way to cross over into the Mariner Cove neighborhood. And the blue line, the dash line there, does represent kind of an interim facility that it does connect, and we can debate whether it's meets our desires or needs or not. But in front of the Cove School, there's a 4-foot sidewalk, and then you've got a low volume parking lot, and then it actually does connect to Spindrift Passage through a kind of nice little bush little tunnel, and it's very usable, and I think it's a relatively safe ride or path of travel for a kid who's a youth kid who's and obviously old enough to ride a bike to school and whatnot. And so if we eliminate that, or if we focus on the other side, it starts to feel like we're shifting all of the attention, I think, to the Mariner Cove side, and maybe not giving those facilities to some of the folks in the Westward side. And then just getting to your question, Chair Vazio, I don't completely know. We did have some feedback from several folks at the first workshop saying that this is really, if you build it, they will come scenario. We definitely don't necessarily have those numbers currently in kind of any of the evaluations or studies we've seen. We obviously know it's a heavily used recreational bike route, but as we've heard, we're prioritizing shared paths for a different type of user. So it's a really good question, and I don't know the answer at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other BPAC members with questions?
I had a question, Bob.
Yes, go right ahead.
Has staff or the consulting engineers thought about where the crossover, which intersection would be utilized if in fact the multi-use path was built on the south side, extending to Robin Drive? Where would users be expected to transition over to the north side to get to the existing and new 8-foot wide path? And a comment, Bob, to your question, Carla Condon and somebody else estimated there's approximately 1,200 to 1,400 citizens that live in the Robin Drive apartments, homes, and the homes beyond Marin Montessori. So we have to kind of keep those citizens in mind.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from BPAC members? Okay, then we will open it up to the public for comment. And RJ, you're probably going to have to help me out on this, but if there's anybody who wants to speak, you raise your hand and we will call on you, and you'll have 3 minutes. I have a timer here. We don't have a timer on screen tonight, but if you can try to keep your comments to 3 minutes, that would be really helpful. If you could tell us your name and where you live, that would be great too. And can I activate speakers?
Looks
RJ?
like I just activated, it looks like Jean Severinghouse. If you can unmute and go ahead and speak.
Jean?
Yes, thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm excited that you're discussing this segment before diving in on the original project. It's wonderful, especially, I made this comment before, but I called up the Bay Trail, Lee Huo, who's one of the designers, and said, hey, what about how could this most successfully work? And his point was that people don't use discontiguous segments where they have to cross the street. And that's actually my experience. I can go through that nice cut through to the parking lot that RJ was pointing through in the back streets and the little tunnel. But then I'm stuck at a bad place having to cross the street down to the south. So I don't tend to use that south side path. And I'm wondering, I know you said it's much more expensive, but I mean, have you looked at drawings? Because it looks like if you moved the road to the south, there's still plenty of room. It's an enormous right of way when you're going through there. That trail on the south side it's huge. There's a lot of land on both sides of the trail. So could you move the road to the south and still have plenty of room to leave like an 8-foot sidewalk on the south side of the road for the segment that already exists, but build the 8-foot multi-use trail on the north side through? And is it worth thinking about, and at least as you're going through the motions, penciling out just moving that road? And I really don't understand enough. It sounds like the curb is the biggest expense, but if you could just address a little bit more what it takes to move a road, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, Jean, thank you for your comments. We'll go through everybody and then we'll have RJ just address everything after we go through all the public comments. So RJ, you want to move on to the next one? Looks like it might be Robert Bundy on my screen. Is that who you're showing?
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Bundy.
Okay, good comments and overview on this. I look at it as the north side between San Clemente and Seawolf. It's primarily used by pedestrians and students going to school, and not the serious cyclists that are doing the Paradise Loop. And the pathway that is on the south side, I see mostly pedestrians on that and some, kids on their bikes, and the serious cyclists are on the road, of course. Just looking at the cost of this and the issue of moving the road, it seems like we already have a nice pathway on the south side. That should be extended. It would seem like it would be less expensive than trying to do something on the north side. And hopefully, maybe we could save some of the money to combine the utility poles into just one utility pole with data on them, rather than the 2 poles on each side of the street. That seems like the limiting factor in putting something together going forward. And we need to see how far our money can go to make this thing work. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, Bob, thank you very much. And RJ, want to bring up
We
Chris
have
Tuff?
Chris Tufts, yeah.
Yep. Really just a modification of David McPherson's question, which was, and it might facilitate easier discussion to pull up that nicely annotated aerial map you had. But I was wondering if we could try to work around just the next section between Golden Hind and Westward by only really shifting the roadway in that area up till that turn, which maybe would allow to put the pathway on the north side and maybe bolster what is currently the sidewalk along the green leading up to Cove School. So if you widen that just a little bit and then you work on the next section, just up and to your right of your cursor, exactly, Golden Hind to Westward, and only shift the roadway there, you'd only lose, you'd move the class 1 effectively from the south side to the north side for only that section. Is that a way to reduce the cost? Only shift the roadway where you need to, because you're up against, private homes, I think, and utility poles, and then keep a longer section of north side, and then out in the turn between outside of east of Westward. That's where we can have more space to do a contiguous north side class 1. Just a suggestion, not really something, I don't know if we can address.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much for your comments. And we will now move on. Is it Matthew Hartzell? RJ?
Yep. Go ahead, Matthew.
Good evening. Hey, commissioners. My name is Matthew Hartzell, WTB TAM, and I have a question about the map that we saw on the previous slide with the 3 colored dotted lines. The blue colored line, which is on Spindrift Passage, and it's labeled the existing observed school access route. My question is that route through the south side of the Cove School property, is that a route that's only open during school hours, and is it only open to school students, or is it open 24/7 to the general public? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said, we're going to be handling all these questions. At the end, RJ is writing everything down. You can see him taking copious notes. And he'll be addressing all this when we're done with public comment. Okay, RJ, I'll let you finish writing and we're going to move on. Looks like we have Barbara Salzman.
Yep. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, well, first I have well, not logistics, but what's the next stage that you're talking about? Because I'm of course interested in the section by the marsh, and I'm not sure you're even going to get to that. And I have another board meeting, so I'm a little anxious here. Is that going to be discussed next or not? And I just wanted to, I don't understand when you say there's a lot of right of way, or somebody said on the section by our marsh. I asked in our recent letter, I don't know how where you measure from, because it didn't seem to us like there was very much right of way without getting into the marsh habitat there. So, you know, we'd like to know where we went out and measured, and it didn't seem like there was very much space. So maybe we're not measuring from the right place. I don't know. And I also wanted to express some support for Bob Bundy's analysis. I think seems quite reasonable and reasonable in cost and use. And also, if you're going to continue to, well, maybe not, maybe for both alternatives, what Bob Ravasio said, seems to me you need to know where those kids are coming from. They're both private schools. I don't know how many of those kids come from Corte Madera, even if there's such a long, you know, queue of cars. It seems to me like, especially for Marin Country Day, there are probably not very many from Corte Madera. So, but I think it is a critical question that you need to know. If you're planning for that as a major feature, then you need to know that information. But anyway, if somebody could tell me what you're going to, if you're going to do the marsh section, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. And it looks like we have Warren Wells. RJ, are you showing that too?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. This is Warren Wells, Policy and Planning Director for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Just want to express my thanks and gratitude for the town and consultant for you know, taking the feedback from the last public meeting and evaluating the Class 1 path. I personally don't have super strong feelings about which side to put the pathway on, but I do have a quick question about the right-of-way constraint that was described across from Westwood Drive, like that place where the right-of-way gets particularly narrow. Is that a property line issue, or is that a wetland issue? I was just curious about what that constraint was. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's see, do we have any other members of the public who have not spoken yet on this segment who wish to speak? Doesn't look like it to me. So we're going to bring it back first off then to RJ, who has extensive notes and is going to be answering all those questions. Right, RJ?
Yep.
Not to put pressure on you or anything,
Yeah,
but
no pressure. And perhaps if you could put that aerial on, Becky, the one with the dash lines. So I just want to clarify. So our analysis through this whole section from Westward to Seawolf showed that you could have a shared path, such as an 8-foot wide sidewalk on the north, leave the class 1 path on the south, perhaps, except for we have some challenges there as you approach Westwood for 150 feet or so. Still have vehicle lanes and some shoulder, but not a class 2. So essentially we're not moving the curb face on the south. We're not having to bring that, we're not having to remove the southern class 1 path. We're not having to bring in fill to raise up grade several feet, get rid of all that beautiful landscaping. So that was one thing I just wasn't sure if that was communicated and interpreted. So I want to make sure that was clear. The other thing is the added cost, that $2.5 to $3 million, is the addition of a new shared path or widened sidewalk that wasn't previously envisioned from Seawolf to Golden Hind. And so it's not so much that, I think the question was, why is it double, or it's, shifting the road is very expensive because of kind of some things I mentioned, removing the curb, removing all the landscaping, grading it, compacting it, bringing in new fill to raise it up several feet, bringing the full road section, probably 8 inches of asphalt, building that all up, putting in a new curb, that gets expensive. That alone is, in excess of, $2.5 million just on the south side before you even put the path on the north. So hopefully that touched on a couple of those points. There was one about utility poles. So in general, if we can ask for poles to be removed and keep the new location within the right of way and we have justification, we typically don't bear the cost of that relocation effort. Although we do have to bear the cost of the coordination and there is a lot of coordination. So although it's always better to combine lines, who wants 2 poles when you can have 1? I don't see that cost of the actual relocation being the town other than the coordination effort. There was a question about, or a comment about the section over by Golden Hind to Westward. And I think that was a good idea about, if we were to look at this further, is there something that can be done there to maybe improve the right-of-way situation? And I heard you loud and clear, Chris, and I think we'll have to look at that depending on the direction we get tonight. Barbara on the right-of-way, and we'll get to it as we continue the presentation, but we're primarily talking about right-of-way to the south. Currently we have a large shoulder and pull out and we have various current uses for it, such as staging and parking, but could some of that be given to the corridor for multimodal? Yes. And so that's primarily what we're talking about when we talk about a wider zone. So not trying to necessarily move the road and features into the marsh. And I don't know if I missed any, but those are the notes that I have. Anyone else from our team? Did we catch anything else that we need to touch on?
It's just a quick clarification to one of Barbara's questions about the property line that we've been showing. That dashed blue line that we're talking about, that is the right of way. That's the property line that we're working within. That's not necessarily a mapped wetland boundary, although the wetlands generally seem to fall within Audubon property, so not within the public right of way, because the public right of way at the Audubon does get very close to the road. In fact, that's the area where we have the least amount of right of way is on that. I guess it would be, if I'm good at directions, the southwest corner of the Audubon. We have the least amount of right of way there. So you are correct in your assertion, Barbara, that there isn't a lot there, but it does widen up as we move east along your property.
I think actually there was one other, and so I think there was a question about where, what locations can we cross, and we will get to some of this in the next presentation, but we already have a crossing at Prince Royal. That is kind of following the master plan where it was kind of designed to go from north to south. I think it's logical to probably put a crossing in the vicinity of the schools, kind of right between the two locations there, and that could serve either a north facility or a south facility. So I think there's benefits regardless of the side of that facility, and then potentially another one, and whether it's westward, see some sense for westward, make a lot of sense as well. So.
Okay.
There's one other thing I'm not sure you touched on. Someone was asking about the route on Spindrift, and I believe that is open to anyone. You basically go to the end of Spindrift and you have access to the parking lot that's on the other side of the trees there. So, but students use it to get to the Cove School.
So yeah, 4 foot wide public sidewalk, more or less public parking lot that connects to a public road.
Okay. RJ, thank you for answering all that. It might be helpful if you put up the sheet with those first two goals again, so we understand what we're being asked to do in this portion of the meeting, because we're going to come back to BPAC now. Okay. So here are the two questions that we're going to come back to BPAC on. And really, we've talked about this a lot, but should a path on the north side of Paradise Drive be explored? And do we support that? I think that's kind of the nut of it. The alternative, if I can just ask a question first to kind of help set this up, RJ, the alternative is to continue working on the south side and put upgraded crossings in at Prince Royal and maybe the schools, so that they're crossing over to the south side and we upgrade the south side path, right? Do I have that?
At a minimum, I think you can see a path that goes to the schools, to Robin Drive on the south, and would still leave some options for connections on the north, but definitely not the full scale multi-use path on the north. And sorry to bother that. We can also revisit some of this discussion, this particular question, as we wrap up the end as well.
Okay. I'm just trying to get an understanding as we're evaluating this. The big differences are going to be cost and time, it sounds like, right? If we go to the north side, is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think we would have to go into this assumption that we're going to have to compete for grant funds in order to fund this kind of new idea of a path on the north side between Westwood and at least to Prince Royal, because that was a section that hadn't been envisioned prior.
So this is potentially a more popular option, but it's a more costly one for sure, and one that's probably going to take a longer time to execute. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, right, for future grants, I think we would be focusing on the project we have at hand, that we have a design consultant moving forward, and that we'll have, hopefully shovel ready here in a year or so. And so, you only have so many grant opportunities, so you can only pick one. And so that's where we would go first. And then once that's funded, then we could shift to various other projects. But yeah.
But if I may bring in the conversation you and I had the other day, you think potentially the north side is a good candidate for grant opportunities?
I think it could be as well. Yeah. Yeah. I think they both are good products, and I think this is a blank slate. I think this would be a lot easier decision. And I think what obviously makes it challenging is the investment and the path on the south, and just an added cost by doing 2 class 1 paths, one on each side.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That was my last set of questions for a few minutes anyway. So I'm going to bring it back to other BPAC members. If you have questions or comments. Yeah, Cheryl, go ahead. You got something?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering about the Spindrift Passage alternative. I think it's probably only known by the school kids and only used mostly by school kids now, although I've used it. And I'm wondering if it's feasible or workable to make that path more known, more visible, or that route, it's not a path, that route more as an alternative to the investment that a north side path would require. And what RJ might think about that. Because I think one of the things that's holding it back is just the lack of users, potential users knowing that that's a route. I mean, I would much rather ride along Spindrift than along Paradise, just because of the speed of the cars going by, even if I'm in a separate facility, you know, separated from the roadway.
Drag it through the mud.
Kirby?
Yeah, so I think it's important to go back and think about why the master plan was written the way it was. There's some of us who were on the committee then who, let's see, who was there? There's probably 4 of us still around why did we choose to have the master plan the way it is? If you could put the slide with the different colored, there you go. Nope, yep, nope, yes. Why did we decide to not have a sidewalk with the green thing and where the green dots are? And it was a discussion then, and I thought I'd try to revisit it and refresh people's memories. And for those on the committee, if you could try to do the same. At some point, because you just kind of go, it seems logical. If you're putting that, they just finished the great sidewalk. I'm going to use west, north, east, south. Sorry, Bob.
That's all right. I got it now. I know what you're talking about, so we're okay.
Yeah, we just put this great sidewalk on the northwest side. Why don't we just continue that? Well, we went and looked at the different user groups and what do the different groups need in terms of passageway through here. And let's just, if we talk about the weekend road warrior, the person doing Paradise Loop, they're probably not going to ride the sidewalk anyways. They're just going to blaze down the road. So that wasn't a user group we were catering to with the sidewalk. But it's a lot of times it's the school kids, right? The school kids need to get to school. And what we concluded was once we have that great sidewalk that just got finished, the safer route for those kids to get to Cove School. Now you have to then look at each of the schools, Cove, Marin Country Day, and Montessori. But for those getting to the Cove School, those are going to take the blue line. That's the safer route to go. For people who might be south, you start looking at the different groups. How would they get there? And without going into all the different groups, which is what we did at the time, I recall, you start to realize, like, yeah, that green line isn't as important. And I would put an asterisk because I know there's somebody chatting away from the Montessori school. If you live in the neighborhood of Seawolf Passage and you try to get to the Marin Montessori school, now you probably feel screwed out of the situation because you have to go cross Paradise and cross Paradise twice, right, as a pedestrian. But otherwise, every constituency is probably fine when you do the routes on how people would get there, how students, if you take the kids and the students as your case study, as in each case on which school they go to, everyone gets satisfied. We don't have this nice, beautiful, continuous sidewalk, but there's just as good, if not better, alternatives.
Okay, thank you, Kirby. So it sounds like you're saying you're not a huge fan of doing something on the north side this extensive.
I didn't say that.
You did, I know, but I'm sorry. I'm just trying to.
I didn't say that. What I'm trying to do is say this is why we thought what we did. Now, what plays into but since you asked, But now what plays into discussion is people see that sidewalk that just got built and they're like, they immediately scratch their head and say, why did you stop where you stopped? And even I asked my wife this evening before I came here, she's like, of course you should continue that sidewalk, right? Because it looks so logical to continue the sidewalk. But I do want people to remember why we chose not to put that in there. And I live on the east side of Corte Madera. I jog along there. I ride my bike along there. So I do know it, but that was the logic we had then. I'm not saying we shouldn't build the path. To be honest, I'm probably still on the fence.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. Any other member of BPAC have an opinion they want to venture on this at this point?
I'll weigh in.
Okay, Dave, thanks.
First, are we supposed to hold our questions and comments regarding the queue of idling cars until later in the hearing?
Yeah, I think that's isn't that in number 3 and 4?
Yeah,
RJ?
we'll be going a little more in detail on the Complete Streets project between Westwood and Robin Drive, and that's the appropriate time.
Perfect. So the goal, I think, of the master plan has always been to get a safe and protected facility all the way to the town's boundary line past Marin, Montessori. None of us were on the BPAC because the BPAC was not created when the town built what is effectively the south side multi-use path. So there was no input from this BPAC. And despite all my research, I can't figure out, exactly what thinking went into putting it there on the south side. And if it were up to me and I had unlimited funds, it seems to me that that south side multi-use path is a path to nowhere. And if we could wipe it clean and build the multi-use path on the north side to tie into the existing 8-foot wide sidewalk, what you end up with is you service all of the citizens who live on Robin Drive, the kids who go to Marin Montessori and Marin Country Day School with a contiguous, safe, wide, protected path from Marin Montessori all the way to Nugget Market, past Nugget Market to the village, and then on to the ferry. And to me, that's really the goal, is we should really swing for the fences on this one. Except for reopening the Alto Tunnel and creating that extension of the north-south greenway, there's no reason to be short-sighted about creating this facility that connects the bay side of Corte Madera, Tiburon, the ferry building, and the north-south greenway. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say, there's no reason to think that at some point Tiburon won't have the vision to try and create a continuous multi-use path that will circle the backside of Tiburon. And part of what inspires me to say that is I'm up in Reno right now, and in the last 20 years, there was no possible way for anyone who wasn't a very experienced bike rider to get from Tahoe City or Sunnyside on the west side to Squaw Valley, on to Truckee, and then on to Reno. Well, now there's a contiguous, wide, safe, protected facility for all multi-users that's been built. And I can see that if this is done right on one side of Paradise, that it's possible to imagine that this could actually continue on at some point when I'm in my motorized wheelchair all the way around to Tiburon. So I think the master plan shouldn't strictly govern this. I think the goal is Bob and I and Kirby were part of creating that master plan, and we didn't have the vision at that time to see how great it was going to be to have an 8-foot wide sidewalk from San Clemente to Seawolf, and then to see, all right, this facility might be continued on the north side. So those are my comments before we get into the question of the right-of-way and the queuing.
Okay, so you're in favor of going with the north side, just to summarize, sounds like.
I am.
Okay.
And if it costs more and takes more time, I'm in favor of doing it once and doing it right.
Okay, thank you. Mark? You get your hand up? Mark Madden?
You're on mute.
You gonna unmute?
Yeah, yes, sorry
There you
about that. I have listened very carefully to everybody's comments, which I really appreciate, all of them. And I am very familiar with the area because I'm one of those weekend, and because I'm retired, weekday warriors that goes the Paradise Loop, or used to at least, 2 or 3 times a week. But I will say that of all the comments I've heard, I'm actually most persuaded by Cheryl's comment about looking at what I would call the blue alternative before we do anything else and expend any other resources for something else. And that is basically the essence of my view right now.
Okay, so you'd like to further explore the blue alternative?
Certainly before we do anything else. I mean, it's not like I am inextricably, unconditionally opposed to North Side, but I think that's putting the proverbial bicycle before the cart. And so I would, yeah, right. I would really like to see much more attention paid to what I think she correctly identifies as the safer route, particularly for children, that is off of Paradise in the first place. Yeah.
RJ, could you bring the map up again so we can all be clear on the blue route again?
Yeah, the famous blue route. Yeah.
Okay, so that's the blue route. To be clear, that's kind of the existing path that they're using right now to Cove School off the new Paradise Bikeway.
better to say existing route, because
Route. Yes,
yeah,
there's not a
yeah.
path. You're right.
Yeah.
Correct. Thank you. Okay. So you would say explore that further and see what we can do to improve that, rather than explore the this major redo on the north side, right?
To just modify just a small bit to explore and I guess flesh out the blue alternative before we consider the north side, which is not to say that I am completely, never north, never. No, I'm not saying that, but certainly the blue alternative, I think, demands a great deal more attention.
Okay. I think I got that. I'm trying to keep track of all this. This is
Yeah, right.
This is complicated. So Cheryl's got her hand up
Yeah.
and is waving it. So I think she wants to
Yeah.
talk right now.
Bob, everyone, I think David articulated a great vision, and I could get behind that vision also. But my concern is, as much as that sidewalk that we created, or that was recently installed, it's a vast improvement over what we had. But I looked at it and I thought, the kids are right on the roadway there. And I know when I was walking to and from school as a kid, we were pushing each other, we were laughing, we were, and so I consider it still kind of, it could still be improved more. And I look at the section of path when you over by the new wheel, when you along Sir Francis Drake there, when you're going east Sir Francis Drake, how many times they have actually wire guard rail, basically poles with wire between to separate the cars from the path, and it's damaged all the time because of cars hitting them. So that's my concern and why I'd like to get people off Paradise. Not, and of course, not everyone's gonna, there'll still be people riding on Paradise, but the people who would like to ride but are concerned about their safety. And so if we can't get a sidewalk or a path that's wider than what the sidewalk was installed, or at least separated, maybe by, as the path on the south side has a nice separation. It's really much more comfortable because of, there's a, I think, a line of vegetation and trees there at the curb that RJ's mentioned. If we can't get a separation like that, then I think, as much as David's vision is really attractive, I don't think it will be as utilized as much. So it's not that I'm against the north side. I think that we have to, I'm not sure it's the best alternative for really getting interested but concerned users on their bikes.
Okay. I think I got that. So north side is not as good, and you would still continue to try to work with the existing
wanna see
pathway on the south side.
I want to see the north side wider than the sidewalk that was recently installed.
Okay. Hang on, wider than sidewalk. Okay, David, I'll get back to you in a minute. But Kirby has his hand up too. I know Kirby wants to render an opinion on this, or at least
Yeah.
more direction.
David got me fired up. David, because you, in remembering all the people that contributed, you forgot to point out that Cheryl was part of that discussion too. And we did discuss a whole lot, and we did spend a lot of time on it, and we weren't short-sighted. And we discussed all the constituents, and your thought of removing the south side pathway is very short-sighted. There's this thing called the Phyllis Elman Trail, right? It's a pedestrian thing. So, you know, it's not, maybe people like me like to run over there and run up the Phyllis Elman Trail. And I see a lot of people walking on that south side pathway to the Phyllis Elman Trail, or just enjoying that pathway. I live on the south side of Paradise Drive, so I don't want to have to cross over Paradise Drive to get onto the loop. You have to think about this from the different constituents and how many times they would have to cross Paradise Drive, because as somebody else pointed out, people don't want to have to cross the street if they don't have to. And if you go through and look at the different constituents, which we did back in 2016, when the committee that you and Cheryl and I and Bob were part of, we did look at the different constituents. If you're going to the Cove School, you will like the blue path here. This is the path that makes the most sense, regardless of which side of Paradise Drive you live on, or if you live on the east side, on the west side of the freeway. You're going to come over, you're going to fall along the yellow dotted lines, and then you'll take the blue path in. It's much safer. Whether you live in my neighborhood south of Paradise Drive or the north side. At some point, if you live in my neighborhood, you do have to cross over. And Cove School's on the other side. Fine, I'll do it at the crosswalk, and then we'll take the safe path over. If you are going to Marin Country Day School, it makes this south side pathway makes the most sense, right? Regardless of what neighborhood you come from. If you come from my side on the south side of Paradise, you just stay on the south side all the way through. If you're in this north side of Paradise Drive neighborhood, at some point you will have to cross Paradise Drive, and you would do it at the natural safe crossing where there is a crosswalk, a light, a signal light at El Camino or Seawolf Passage. So you would cross there, and then you would stay on the south side all the way to Marin Country Day School. Even if you were coming from the west side of 101, you would still do that. You have to cross Paradise Drive, and that makes sense for you. So we looked at all the different constituencies, and when you get down to it, and I used children going to school as the example, but there are other people, adults, that might want to also go to the parks at the schools or the Phyllis Elman Trail. And it still makes sense from all these different pathways and how they would go. The constituent group that isn't satisfied probably with this is the Montessori school, because there is an example where if you live on the north side of Paradise, you would have to cross Paradise twice. And that is the inconvenience that people don't want to do. They don't want to cross the busy street twice. Sorry, I didn't want to go through all the different constituencies, but since your proposal was to eliminate a pathway that's used and pleasantly and enjoyed by many people, I had to speak up.
That's okay. No, we're trying to get everybody's opinion here, Kirby. I think it's really critical. So thank you for doing that. So it sounds like you're in favor of, if anything, keeping and enhancing the existing configuration. Is that
I'm for keeping the south side, definitely, because that was proposed. To be honest, I'm probably still on the fence on whether to build the sidewalk or not. I recognize the budget issue. And as my wife said, where could you put $2.5 million to some other project? If you showed me the trade-off, that probably is right. I mean, you sit there and go, and RJ's going to sit there and go, if I do this $2.5 million, I don't get that $2.5 million. So if there is a real trade-off, then we should probably ask ourselves that question.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to specify what the trade-off would be, because some of the money would come from grants that would be specific to the project. But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, and God knows we got a lot of stuff we need to do in town. Dave, you get your hand up again. McPherson, you wanted to speak again?
I do. I wanted to comment about the utilization, Mark's comment and Cheryl's comment about Spindrift. Spindrift Passage, for 3 years, I worked with Safe Routes to School and did their annual teaching, where we brought bikes to the kids at the Cove School and cycled through the neighborhood. And I know that many parents usher their kids to school using Spindrift. Spindrift is not a facility that's going to be utilized as a grade separated multi-use path that's going to try and connect the east side of Corte Madera to the west side of Corte Madera. There are 3 intersections on Spindrift that create problems. There's probably more than 75 driveways on Spindrift where people can pull in and pull out. So if the goal is to be able to have a 3rd grader ride her first bike from the east side of Corte Madera to Nugget Market, to the village and beyond, as well as an 80-year-old utilizing a motorized scooter, Spindrift will always be there. It's just a regular street, but it can't be promoted as being an alternative to a safe, grade separated multi-use path from the east side of Corte Madera to the west side. And Kirby, my thinking on if we were doing this for the first time, rather than looking at this existing grade separated path on the south side, I don't think any of us would have created this short section from Prince Royal to Westward. It just wouldn't make any sense. You would have a normal small sidewalk on the south side, and on the north side, you'd have a path that was 8 to 10 feet wide, that was separated from the road traffic and ran all the way to Marin Montessori, if not beyond. It would service all of the people who live in Robin Drive and beyond, who are citizens of Corte Madera who live beyond Marin Montessori. It would service the families that choose to ride their bikes to Marin Country Day School, because they have their own dedicated overpass over over Paradise, so it's safe. So I'm looking at this really with the vision of, as I say, swinging for the fences, and assuming that we could design this as if we didn't have the current as-built existing shared use path. I would simply put a traditional sidewalk on the south side and have a grade separated multi-use path on the north, that would connect all the way to the ferry building.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Mark Madden, you got your hand up again. Did you want to speak again or?
No, I did not put up my hand.
Oh.
No, I don't want to
You,
speak again.
you didn't take it down. You just didn't take it down from last time.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. No, it's okay. I'm just trying to make sure anybody who wants to speak
All right.
gets to speak. Any other members of BPAC want to say anything at this point, or it's clear we don't have a consensus here, I think. Kirby is saying the south side is still the way to go, he thinks in his mind. Wait, Cheryl, did you want to say something else? Your hand's up again.
Well, I guess I agree with David that if we were starting from scratch, we would consider the path on the north side. And I also agree with Kirby that I don't think we want to get rid of the path, the short segment on the south side. And so the way the question is phrased, I think, does the master plan govern the direction of the project, or should the path on the north side of Paradise Drive be explored? I guess some of my negativity about it is that I want to get to see the west end. We have money for that. We have a grant. We have some work has been done on that. And if I don't understand how we're, how the question about the north side, which is really we're talking mostly on the west end of that. I'm still a little bit confused about that if we say yes, we should consider the path on the north side. How does that impact what we've been talking about of the frontage from westward going east? And is it going to delay that project? All of a sudden we have a project that's twice as big at least, right?
I think so. Yeah, that's my understanding.
So
is, yes,
I mean,
to
say yes to a north side path is one thing, but to say it in the context when we're trying to get the original project was from Westward Avenue East. So it's expanding the project then. Is that correct?
I'm gonna jump in there. Yeah, I know this would likely be a future project. The focus still is to kind of figure out what is the best option or alternatives that we should focus on for the portion between Westward to the eastern limit. But we've learned that we need to understand the portion to the west to help inform that decision. So that's kind of what we're trying to get some feedback on.
So the design of the east segment will depend to some extent on what we decide for the west segment. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it won't hold up the development of or at least won't hold it up too much. So it'll maybe complicate some of the things, but it won't mean that we can still implement the eastward segment.
Yeah, we have design funds dating back to 2010 from TAM to design the portion from Westward to Robin Drive. And so it's really, for the most part, limited those start, westward to Robin Drive. And we're not trying to double the length of the project this time.
So RJ, is the standard width of a multi-user path 8 feet or 12 feet? And are we going for 8 feet or 12 feet when we're talking about the north side?
Shared path, which could be a multi-use path. It also could be an 8-foot wide sidewalk. A class 1 has a minimum width of 8 feet, but it also has various shoulder widths and buffers. And so it's unlikely you could get a multi-use path on the north side, but you could get an 8-foot wide sidewalk on the north side and still have room for 2 vehicle lanes and not remove the class 1 path on the south.
Okay. Okay. Then I'll go for it.
You're going to go for what?
I'm going to go for the north side path.
You're going to go for the north side path. Okay. So you're going to amend what you had said.
With those contingencies that RJ has just mentioned, keeping the south side path.
Okay. Kirby, you got your hand up again?
Yeah. So you keep pegging me as deciding against the
I'm
north
sorry.
side path.
I'm not trying to peg you. I'm just trying to clarify where we're
Because
coming out here.
I've tried to say I'm undecided. I've been trying to point out why we made the decision that we did, and the logic and the argument for why it was. It doesn't mean that 5-6 years later we can't change our mind. But I wanted, and that's why I said what I said. And I'd probably say I'm still undecided. And I would actually point out that the first question I asked at the beginning of this was, it would be nice to see what the choices are on the east side, right? And then that kind of sways whether it's worth, if I really like the northern path on the east side, then I say, wow, that looks so much nicer. Of course we want to continue that. So that's why, like, which dictates which. It would be nice to see what the options are in making this decision, but I know you want to know our decision, and so you can evaluate which options to plan for. There's a little chicken and egg problem there. But also, as a user and an enjoyer of the Class 1 pathway on the south side, in my mind, I had always envisioned that just is going to continue all the way to, because it's such a great pathway, and I see people enjoying it so often that it seems like the natural extension that would be the path that continues all the way to Marin Country Day, because I'm a fan more of Class 1 pathways than 8-foot wide sidewalks right next to fast moving traffic. So if I have to pick, and extending a Class 1 pathway or extending an 8-foot wide sidewalk next to fast moving traffic, I would pick extending the Class 1 pathway. But I'll put it here. I mean, if we have the money, it would be great to have the north side sidewalk extended. It makes tons of sense, right? And if RJ can find the money, go for it. That's
okay. Okay, I think I got all that. RJ, we're not giving you any kind of, there's no clear consensus here emerging. Can you possibly enlighten us on what Kirby just asked? Maybe that might help.
Maybe let me,
I mean, I guess the question is, yeah, like what are the trade-offs here? If we say, yeah, let's go for the north side, I mean, what is the time frame and the money? I mean, and I know you don't have exact figures, I know, because we haven't mapped this all out, versus saying, let's pursue improving the south side and extending the south bike path and following that route. Is that a valid question, or?
let me try to focus it a little bit and try to get ask a slightly different question that I think will help the team push forward. So, I mean, we're trying to get enough information to move forward with the alternatives process, and we'd like to come back with, 3 or 4 alternatives and not have to study 7 or 8, not just because it's more work, but it just puts more options on the table and things get more confusing. So we are trying to, where we can, build a consensus. And so one of the points that we brought up earlier, that's, the consensus we were hearing was prioritize shared paths over Class 2 bike lanes. So that right there potentially, saves 2 or 3 alternatives for us to further analyze. on this one, I guess now, and the question was just explore, do we want to continue to explore the north side? And I'm kind of hearing the answer is yes, because we want to know more about it. But can we agree or build a consensus on whether that is limited to maintaining the class 1 path on the south? Because for me, the widen the road option, you're now talking, and we didn't prepare a number on this. I think you're talking a $6 million effort, and then you still lose the class 1 path in the south. Whereas we think we can put in an 8-foot wide sidewalk on the north, leave the class 1 on the south, and it's more in the neighborhood of $2.5 to $3 million. So can we build consensus on that option, or are we looking at basically completely fresh canvas and do this widened road project that's $6 million?
Okay. I haven't heard any support for widening the road and a $6 million project. I don't think anybody's interested in that. Is there any BPAC member who wants to stop me and say that they are? You are. You want to explore $6 million in widening the road?
I want to clarify, Bob. Am I muted?
No.
Okay. I have always assumed that connecting the east side of Corte Madera would be an extension of the south side path, and that it would remain substantially similar to what exists now, which is a gorgeous multi-use path that is grade separated from the 50-mile-an-hour vehicles on Paradise Drive. When I advocate for the north side, I'm not advocating for an 8-foot wide sidewalk that is right up against traffic going 50 miles an hour. I withdraw my advocacy for the north side if it's not grade separated from the traffic on Paradise. My vision is simply that if we could have a contiguous multi-use path that is a facility that is grade separated from the high-speed traffic on Paradise, I'm all for that. And I'm not as concerned with the cost as I am the overall safety and attractiveness of the facility. If the cost barriers are too much and the consulting engineers really say we can only put in a sidewalk on the north side, then I would say put all the money into extending the south side multi-use path, which I understood always had problems. And RJ and I, the BPAC, have talked about how to extend it and eliminate the queue from MCDS, and also maybe having to do a boardwalk over that ditch. But whether it's on the south side or the north side, all I'm saying is that it has to be a facility that is grade separated from the traffic.
Okay.
I can say that I think if you are talking about a class 1 path on the north side, you will have to shift the road, and you will lose, by definition, the class 1 path on the south.
I'm glad that's kind of what I've been hearing. And as I said, I wouldn't mind that as long as there was a sidewalk, but I don't know that we have the community support for that kind of expense. That's just sort of my grand idea of why it would be an attractive contiguous path.
Yeah, I understand your point. That would be attractive, but RJ, I mean, that would be a really extensive timeline, not to mention financially a huge commitment to try to do something that extensive, right? Am I?
Yeah, because even the 6 number, now we're adding in a 4-foot wide sidewalk that wasn't built into that number. on the south side.
You know, I just have a hard time pursuing something like that, supporting something like that. I just don't see that getting the use that would make sense. I mean, it would take years to get something like that done also. I mean, that's the other thing. Even if, you know, the town council got behind it and said, yeah, let's spend the $6 million, which I would have a hard time justifying going to them and, you know, asking them all to do. So I would not pursue that. So that means, David, you do not want to pursue anything that's only 8 foot wide on the north side.
I think that that's right, Bob. I think consistent with what Cheryl said, as much as I love the new 8 foot wide sidewalk from San Clemente to Seawolf, and it's straight and it doesn't weave in and out of shrubs, it still is right up against, you know, traffic on Paradise, and is not as attractive and safe as the south side grade separated multi-use path. So all things being considered, I guess what I would say is, given the cost, extending the south side path to Marin, Montessori, and Robin Drive, keeping it grade separated with a possible option of a 4 foot wide sidewalk on the north side at some point in the future is maybe the right way to approach this.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to put everybody on the spot here, but can I ask everyone else to sort of summarize, like in a minute or less, where you are? Because we're running along here and we still got we still got 2 more points to go through. Is that possible? Can anybody do that? Kirby?
I'm a fan of continuing the class 1 pathway all the way to Marin Country Day.
Continue class 1. Okay, so
That's
it sounds like
I'm a South Side guy.
Robin,
now you are. Oh, now he admits it. Okay. Cheryl?
Yeah,
Are you?
I concur with David and Kirby.
Mark, are you coming at it any differently?
I'm proud to say I concur with all 3 of my colleagues. Yeah.
Hey, if you are for it, then I am too. So I think we have. I always go. You guys know much more about this than I do, I think. So thank you. I think we actually have some kind of direction and agreement. RJ, is that clear?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much. I know it's a lot to consider, absorb, all the above, and I appreciate you guys working through it.
It's a ton to process. It's a lot to process and try to figure out. No question about it. This is the most complicated thing we've dealt with in quite some time.
what's the terminus of the project? Is it Robin Drive or is it beyond Robin Drive?
It's the eastern town limit, which I think is 400 feet east of Robin Drive.
Thank you.
Yeah. And in fact, should we jump into the remaining presentation, Bob?
Yeah, it's got to be easy from here on in, right?
Yeah. Right. Becky, you want to take it away?
Yeah, it looks like we lost John. He had another commitment. As with the section we just talked about west of Westwood, as we focus in on our specific Complete Streets project, the project between Westwood and the eastern town limit, we find there are many, many options that to consider. And that's where we really need your help, is to help whittle down some of the options that we should be looking at as we move forward with some alternative designs. So just to recap, the catalyst of this project was to provide multimodal access to Paradise Drive. So we're looking at pedestrian and bicycle improvements to this segment of the corridor that's at this point largely devoid of any bike or ped improvements. Right now, the corridor is used for vehicle travel, and there's also quite a bit of on-street parking and queuing that is also used in this stretch. The street is used by avid cyclists, and as I think a member of BPAC mentioned previously, a lot of these cyclists aren't necessarily part of our target user group for this project because we anticipate they're going to continue to use the roadway despite any facilities that we might build for bikes or peds. We do have constraints, right-of-way constraints, environmental constraints, particularly along Audubon where there's salt marsh. There are constraints limiting what we can do out here. There's a lot of users, there's a lot of potential users, but there's a limited area that we can work in. So there certainly will be a trade-off in terms of what we can accommodate. And that's really where we need help from this group, is to figure out how we should weigh our options and what trade-offs we should make. So right away, speaking of right away, here's a graphic that illustrates a pretty typical situation that we have on our complete streets corridor. We have, the quote unquote right of way, actual property line to property line it varies, but it's generally around 60 feet wide in our corridor. The actual width that we consider usable width to plan out the project is more like 42 feet plus or minus. So what happens to that other 20 feet of usable width that I mentioned? There's a sizable drainage ditch on the south side of Paradise Drive. It sounds like David at least is very familiar with that, as he mentioned some options for doing sort of a boardwalk over it. That ditch is an environmental feature. That's one of those hard constraints that we're not going to work within. Another area that's within our right of way, but outside of our usable corridor, is an area that's along some of the school frontages where there's miscellaneous improvements that the schools have done, landscaping, or just big grading challenges, hillsides, etc. That also would be quite difficult and costly to incorporate into our usable area. So for our purposes, we're really looking at a 42-foot wide swath to plan our project within. So what can fit in that 42-foot swath? Quite a few things. Obviously, vehicle travel lanes are something that's going to need to be a part of the project, continue to be there. So if we plan on 2 11-foot travel lanes, that leaves about 10 feet on either side of those travel lanes that we have to do improvements. Keep in mind, this graphic does illustrate the power poles that we see on the corridor. There's the power poles at least down one side continuously, and in many areas, there's power poles on both sides of the road. So we have somewhere around plus or minus, mostly minus 10 feet on either side of the road to work in. That's a good amount of space to do improvements, but again, there will need to be a trade-off. It's not enough space to improve to get all of our users of facilities that they're looking for. So let's start by talking about some bike and ped improvements. We've heard loud and clear during our public workshop, and as we've been informed by the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan, it appears as though there's a very strong preference to having a shared use path or a class 1 path. And so for this group, just to clarify, so that we're all using the same term, same vernacular here, the class 1 would be a pathway that is separated. There's a physical separation from the roadway, typically landscaped or barrier, and then it's a path that can be used by cyclists or pedestrians. This graphic here illustrates what a class 1 might look like. Shared use path is a little bit more vague of a term. This is a term that essentially is just a very wide sidewalk. This can be used by cyclists and pedestrians. There can or cannot be landscaping between it. Typically, it's raised up on a curb. So essentially, think of it as a very wide sidewalk that can facilitate cyclists. In addition to those facilities, the shared use path or the class 1, we're looking at likely implementing what we think would be like sharrows or a class 3 for this segment. We didn't hear a lot of support for class 2s, like dedicated bike lanes. We didn't see that mentioned in the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. And since the current configuration doesn't include any class 2 bike lanes and avid cyclists still use the area, it felt appropriate to at least start by considering using class 3s or sharrows like you see here to accommodate those on-road cyclists. Let's talk about some other users. Parking is observed, all up and down this corridor, up and down this section of Paradise Drive. Primarily, we see parking concentrated in front of the 2 schools, in front of the Montessori and the day school. Parking occurs on and off on both sides. We also see a pocket of parking that occurs in front of the Ring Mountain Preserve, probably for patrons of the park there. So parking is currently a use that is on this corridor. There could be opportunities to direct some of this parking, although I think it would be fair to say that at least some degree of this parking does need to be thought of as a feature that we should accommodate in the roadway. Queuing is another item that we have likely all experienced and seen out there, particularly in the last couple of years as we deal with COVID and there's reluctance to carpool or ride buses or public transit. So there's a couple of queues that you've likely observed that develop. One is in front of the Montessori school and one is for the day school. Both of these queue up on the shoulder, eastbound traffic queuing up on the south shoulder of Paradise Drive. Got a graphic here that shows, just one typical day of the queuing for the day school. It seems like it generally extends from up and away to nearly westward. So that gives you an idea of what kind of queuing we're seeing. We understand the queuing is only at pickup and drop off, and primarily at pickup time in the afternoon, as drop off in the morning happens quite a bit quicker. I do want to point out that the town and both the schools have been working collaboratively together for years on the queuing. There have been improvements made to the queuing, and we continue to seek out improvements to the queuing. I don't think it would be a stretch to say that it would be perhaps unrealistic to instantaneously expect to remove all of the queuing from the road for the schools. This seems like a long-term goal. And so for the immediate project, I think that the BPAC needs to consider some sort of accommodation for some level of queuing, at least for the short term, to accommodate the schools. So here's an idea that I wanted to put in front of this group to get some opinions on ways that we can handle queuing and parking. So this graphic, just to recap, this illustrates some of the typical queuing that we see in front of the Montessori school, primarily on the shoulder, and then some of the typical queuing that we see for the day school, wrapping around here to the Ring Mountain Trailhead and over to Westwood. During public comment, we had heard a comment about the use of flexible use lanes or flex space. And so what this might look like for our particular project here is a space that can be used for parking sometimes, and then a space that can be used for queuing other times. And so the purpose of this space would be to meet both of those uses without having to provide, necessarily parking on the north side and only queuing on the south side. So if I were to dial down into an example here of how this could potentially work, let's think about who the users would be and when they might use this area for their purposes. So the queuing, as I had just mentioned, this only occurs on school days during drop-off times in the morning and pickup times in the afternoon. So pretty small windows of time when this queuing occurs. A lot of the parking that we see occurs on the weekends for patrons of the preserve, and also occurs in the middle of the day when you have parents visiting the schools or other groups visiting the schools and they need to park their vehicle off campus real quick as they run in. So it seems like there's could be a nice trade-off for when these areas need to be used. And these areas, the use of these areas could be controlled by special signage saying that parking is allowed except for certain timeframes when the queuing is expected to occur.
All right, thanks, Becky. So this is basically kind of the wrap-up slide. So we did want to focus in again on kind of two questions of interest to get feedback from BPAC and the community. So first is what bike and ped features and facilities should be further studied for inclusion as part of the Complete Streets project. And really, I think, there's multiple things, right? There's queuing, there's parking, there's the multi-use path. I think we're going to assume travel lanes, but we're not going to get all of those. So, you can answer it in, what's your top two priority? Which one do you not care for? And maybe that'll help build some consensus there. But we know something won't fit. Secondly, should the project include programming for on-street parking that doubles as school drop-off and pickup and queuing? And so really this is, is this an opportunity to
Okay. Thank you, RJ. Could you talk about the first one a little bit more? Could you give some examples again of what?
Yeah. So just going, and maybe it's the right-of-way slide, Becky. So I mean, we generally have on average, and I think it's good practice. It's best if you can have kind of a consistent corridor. And so, you know, right off the bat, we're losing about 22 feet for a roadway for vehicles. So, you know, you can put parking on one side and a multi-use path on the other, but then you don't have queuing. You could have queuing and a path, but then you don't have parking. Maybe get creative and you can find a multi-use path and then this dual use parking queuing. So kind of that's what we're seeing, and that's obviously it needs a lot more study, but we're just trying to see if where does that land with BPAC? You know, of those, I guess 3, which is the top 2, and then should we try to come up with a hybrid approach to fold in that 3rd?
Could you go back? Yeah, go back to the slide again with the goals. Okay, I don't know. Maybe if I just had a long day, I'm just trying to make sure I understand this. Okay, is there any BPAC member who would like to address this? First off, has comments on this or input? It looks like we have a couple. Dave?
Maybe actually, let me clarify one more. I think we all, the project was born out of having a multi-use or a bike ped facility. So I think, and we've already heard that, you know, the community wants a separated shared path as opposed to class 2. So I think we have to assume, I think it's fair to assume that that's in. So on the remaining side, it's parking or queuing or some sort of shared version of parking and queuing.
And that would not be, that's not on the path, right?
Correct.
I just want to be clear about that.
Yeah.
Parking and queuing, or are you saying the parking and queuing would happen on the path?
The parking and queuing would be on their own side per se, or separate from the path. Yeah.
Okay, so the path would be on one side of the road and
Dedicated.
parking and queuing would be on the other side.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, you also could have them right next to each other. That we could look at, but they wouldn't overlap.
But they are separated. Okay, I was concerned because as I was looking at this, I was thinking you were implying that at some point in the day, the path would actually be given up for parking, queuing.
No.
But you're not implying that. Okay. Okay. Back to BPAC. Dave, you're at the top of my screen, so you're
We're
first.
doing questions, public comment, and then
I'm
comment.
sorry, I should clarify that. We're going to do questions first, then we'll do public comment, and then we'll come back for an opinion. Sorry about that. Thank you for the clarification. Go questions.
2 questions. With respect to the drainage ditch on the south side of Paradise, will any design feature consider straddling that ditch to gain additional space and protection from the street? That's one question. If that's environmentally possible. The second question I have is, I had presented at the prior public comment meetings 2 diagrams that show the queuing possibilities for Marin Country Day. And one of those diagrams showed that going up and away to the back parking lot near the rear gym created 1,572 feet of queuing possibility on MCDS's private property, and then queuing the parking lot with parking attendants on the north side would provide about 11 to 1,200 feet of queuing possibility. In other words, if MCDS was really trying to be a good neighbor here, have they, I think the CFO is in communication, have they proposed a way to get their queue of idling cars off of Paradise and onto their private property?
Sure, I can answer those. Regarding the ditch, we did have some wetland delineation work done by an environmental firm, and so we do believe there's wetlands in there. And I'm not a biologist, but plants do need sunlight to live. And so if you do put a boardwalk over them and it blocks shade, you're likely looking at impacts. We can explore that further, get a formal expert opinion, but generally that's what I expect the outcome would be. And that's the challenge with the, the boardwalk that would straddle over them. Secondly, so several years ago, the town had been, has seen a concept of what the queuing off the street could look like for Marin Country Day, I believe. And so they do have a conceptual plan, and perhaps they can speak to it tonight. And I don't know exactly where it stands, beyond, what the conceptual level plans that we're seeing, but it did obviously expand the ability to queue off the street. We heard, I think, from Kathy that they do not have financing for it. So that's what we've heard so far. And so kind of the question we still have to kind of muddle through, where we stand on knowing that information. Any other questions?
Can I go?
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Kirby.
Yeah, so I just want to confirm what I think I heard in a question. So we could have on the south side a shared use / class 1 pathway all the way to all the way along the route, correct?
Yes.
There's enough space for that.
Yeah, there's enough space.
Okay, that's my question.
Okay. Any other questions from BPAC members? Cheryl, hand up. Yep.
My question is about could the coupling of the parking and the queuing accommodate people who park for access to the Ring Mountain Reserve and might be they might be hiking during drop off or pickup time when you'd want to have the area for queuing. So that's something that has to be taken into account. I know you probably don't have the system worked out, but it's a complication.
Yeah, we would want to analyze it, obviously, and understand the lengths needed for appropriate queuing and whatnot. But there's also an option to have portions that are far enough back that could still maybe even be permanent parking or always serve Marin open space and not limited when the school is queuing. That's something we could analyze, right? So something that's a little bit closer to Westwood that is more or less always available parking. That's definitely something we could look at.
Okay. Any other questions from BPAC members? No, then we're going to open it up for public comment. So if there's any member of the public who wishes to speak, if you could raise your hand, and you will have 3 minutes. And RJ, you're gonna bring people on. It looks
Yep.
like I've got
James. Go ahead
is that
and unmute.
James Toe.
Yeah, this is James Toe. Thank you, members of the committee, for this spending the time in this long meeting to discuss this. I'm a parent at MCDS, and I just wanted to support or explain to you, I think, the difficulties we have with the queuing as I experience sort of on a day-to-day basis. I think the suggestion regarding parking limitations for Ring Mountain during queuing hours would be a tremendous help for several reasons. I think when cars are parked there for Ring Mountain, it creates inefficiencies in the pickup. Usually, and there's been a lot of discussions on how to make the pickup more efficient to limit the disruption to Paradise Drive. But when cars are parked there in front of Ring Mountain, cars are coming up and they can't immediately distinguish whether the car is parked or whether it's waiting in line to pick up someone. And so it makes it a much more disjointed affair. I also think when going around the cars that are parked for Ring Mountain and not in the queuing line also makes it a somewhat hazardous experience on Paradise Drive, as you can imagine, because people are kind of pulling out and cars are traveling pretty fast on Paradise Drive. So I thought that suggestion was a fantastic one and would alleviate a lot of the what I see as queuing issues and from that pickup time on Paradise Drive.
Okay. Thank you, James. Looks like Robert Bundy. RJ?
That's correct, Dr. Bundy.
Okay.
Yeah, the issue of parking and queuing would seem to be very difficult. And I would think that parking for Ring Mountain as well as for the Audubon property could be sort of lined off that, you're far enough off the street that it wouldn't affect the queuing. And I'm not sure how much parking is really needed beyond Ring Mountain. It seems like the schools should be able to provide parking for the staff and for anybody that needs to come in for parent-teacher visit or something like that, so that you would keep the road or this roadside available for the queuing as needed. I was also very interested to hear what you said about the utility lines. Seeing the utility lines on the north side and the poles with, I think, the data lines on the south side, most other places, everything is done on one pole. And the ideal thing that I would like to see would be if we could continue what is started at San Clemente going down to Paradise to Seawolf, is these taller metal poles. They're further separated, they carry everything, and that would aesthetically be superior, and then would leave more space on the side of the roads for all these other purposes that we need them for. So that seems like one of the key things that we need to do, just to get some more space to do all these things that we want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bundy. And RJ, looks like Carla Condon next. Is that what I'm showing?
That's correct.
Okay. Carla,
There.
welcome.
Thank you, Bob. A couple of comments. First of all, for the past many years, probably close to 20, every time that the Marin Country Day or Marin Montessori proposes expansions, which they've always gotten, that the condition was that not only would they be able to accommodate parking, but also another thing was to work together so that they had different school class times beginning and ending. so that they weren't all doing the same thing at the same time. I live on Paradise Drive. I would say that during the morning and in the afternoon around 3 o'clock, traffic is at a level F, that I can't get out of my driveway. We can't take our dogs for a walk because it's not safe to even get onto Paradise Drive with the traffic congestion that there is. So I would encourage the schools to please consider, as they had said they would in the past, having different school beginning and ending times, so to help with the traffic. Also, I know that the condition was for Marin Country Day School that they were going to be able to accommodate parking on their own property, and that things have improved, but I have not seen any improvement. And I am on that path every single day. So that is one thing that I just wish that they would be more proactive in doing. And lastly, the ditch, that I think it's the same thing had been done, if I remember correctly, in Sausalito, and that even we had a little conversation with Barbara Salzman on November 30th, and that didn't seem to raise the red flag to her that that would be a problem environmentally. So anyway, I hope that we can pursue that during the summer, spring, summer. It's dry. It's not a marsh. There's no wetlands or anything. So I think that that would really help. But the other thing, that I just wanted to say is that what I'm curious about is, since you are planning to go beyond or east of Robin Drive, how you're going to configure the roadway, how you propose to increase the roadway for whether it be bicycles or pedestrians or what. So I would like some sort of response to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Okay, looks like Barbara Salzman is next. RJ?
That's right. Go ahead, Barbara. Thank you.
My board meeting's over, so I missed the middle though. I don't remember our conversation, Carla. I would say that you do need to look at that. I think it does have some wetland vegetation. Also, I don't know if it's owned by the county or if it's in, if how they would feel, but the reason it's dry in the summer is because we're in a Mediterranean climate. A lot of our drainage ways dry up in the summer. So we don't have rain all summer, even in the best of years. But I also wanted to say that we want to keep some of our parking. I mean, it's used by Ring Mountain people. I went over the other day, and Monday it was, so it was a holiday, and our parking was full, and so was the parking in front of Ring Mountain. And the school wasn't even in session. But anyway, we go to our property not frequently, but off times, during the day to do work and whatever. So I hope you're not talking about taking away any of that parking. But my question remains about how close. How close would you come any further to the marsh, any closer to the marsh with any of these alternatives? Where that's the area where the curb is.
Okay, thank you. RJ is going to address all the questions
Good.
At the end, after we're done with public comment. And it looks like Warren Wells might be next. RJ, I know you're furiously taking notes.
Sorry about that. Warren, go ahead.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Warren Wells, Marin County Bicycle Coalition. Just a couple quick comments. So on the queuing, I don't want to minimize anyone's experience seeing a long queue try and drop their kid off, but I do want to make sure that we're planning for the future and not for the present. And it was noted earlier that the queues have increased with COVID, and we will be seeing vaccines for younger kids soon, and to make sure that we're not solely looking at the queues today and thinking that those will continue indefinitely. Second comment, I do want to note that, there is demand for parking at Ring Mountain, no doubt, but one thing that we are doing is improving the access to the Ring Mountain preserves, especially if the pathway is placed on the south side of Paradise Drive, which really does actually create, kind of an unbroken pathway access from most of the Larkspur Corte Madera area. So we shouldn't expect, there will be some people who can bike there, and if we or walk there for that matter, if we provide adequate facilities. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. And looks like Matthew Hartzell, RJ.
Yes, thank you. So north of Paradise Drive, there is not enough space in the current right-of-way for a multi-use path unless it were to encroach on the Audubon parcel, which I know nobody wants to see happen. So it's really only feasible that the multi-use path goes on the south side of Paradise Drive, unless that is if the entire roadway were shifted to the south. And now at one of the earlier workshops, I don't remember if it was the first one or the second one, I thought that one of the consultants or perhaps RJ said something about there's lots of things on the table, even looking at shifting the entire roadway is on the table. I just wanted to check in again at this juncture. Is that still on the table? Is that going to be looked at in the alternatives at the next workshop, or is that not really on the table at this point? I do recall the first half of tonight's meeting, the discussion in the segment to the west of Westwood Drive, talking about the prohibitive cost of shifting the roadway to the south, because it involves rebuilding the curb and drainage and asphalt and everything like that. So I did have a suggestion, however, if you want to look at putting the pathway on the north side of Paradise between Robin and Westward and not encroaching on the Audubon parcel, then moving the roadway south, you could actually ask Marin Country Day School to help pay for the cost of moving the roadway in exchange for them being able to use the queuing space, which is of course a public good, for their own private use. They could make a deal with the town to help pay for this public good in exchange for their right to occupy it as a private entity. That's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I don't see any additional hands up if anyone hasn't spoken, RJ? No? Okay.
Looks like everyone.
Okay, so let's close public comment and we'll move on to RJ. Do you want to address any of the questions that were brought up? I know you were furiously taking notes there.
Hopefully I got them all. If not, the rest of the team can jump in. So the project limits are, roughly 400 feet east of Robin Drive to capture the town limit. The driver of the project is the multimodal component, and really all the master plans that we've been looking at, right, showed those going to the schools, to Robin Drive. And that is the focus, I think, for the multimodal element. We didn't want to leave a 400-foot stretch of roadway outside of the project that we have to come back and repave or slurry or something. So really that segment east of Robin Drive isn't envisioned to be an extension of a sidewalk that doesn't serve beyond or marry up with the remainder of the extension of Paradise Drive. It is really an opportunity for striping, for slurry, for other things. At least that's how we had envisioned it thus far. I think Barbara asked how close to the marsh, and I would say, we're not going to cross any right-of-way lines, and we want to avoid impacts. Generally, I think that's in the vicinity of the curb face, but I think we got to study that more. And I think, I don't know if Becky has more insight on kind of where that lies with respect to those two issues. You want to hop in, Becky, or do we need more analysis?
Yeah, no, I can speak to that. We've been looking at, we've mapped out the wetlands, coastal marsh, other environmental features, et cetera. All the property obviously is valuable up to the right of way, although there's quite a bit of property up to the right of way or even within the right of way that is not, mapped marsh or wetland. Nonetheless, we have been looking at alternatives, in our initial layouts that we've been doing that don't really go beyond the existing curb line that there is on Paradise Drive. And so primarily the work that we're doing is expanding the corridor or the section of the roadway south and not north into the marsh or past where the existing road already occupies.
And then the other question that I heard that I wanted to respond to is the shifting of the roadway. And so just a little clarification on that. So, based on what Becky said, let's say, for example, we use the existing curb face on the north side. And let's just hypothetically say we put a new facility and maybe that's a path, maybe that's something else. We would then be shifting the center line to the south some distance. And so likewise, when we were talking about the first part of the meeting, if we put in that 8-foot wide sidewalk, that would also have potentially a shift of the center line a couple feet. So I think we're talking the road could shift several feet. I think there's only maybe the only scenario where it shifts significantly is when you put both of those, the multimodal facility and perhaps that if it's a parking queuing facility right next to each other on the same side, then maybe the road shifts more like 12 feet. But generally, we're just talking a few feet either side. And I guess what makes this one different from a cost perspective, in terms of shifting, is it's all from one side of usable space to the other. It's basically more or less flat or just crowned like a road is. When we talk about the section we were talking about earlier today, the western section, you have a defined curb, and then you've got landscaping and the grade drops off several feet. So those added costs to demo the existing curb, rebuild the curb, bring in fill to raise that portion up, and bring it up for a roadway are very expensive. Whereas when we're talking about it already being kind of level and plain across the way, shifting a road isn't as hard in this section for this project. So hopefully those answered the questions, and unless Becky or Chris caught another one that I missed.
Okay, thank you, RJ. So now we're back to BPAC for comments. RJ, could you put the screen up again with the goals and up? Thank you. So you would like some input from us on what further features and facilities should be talked about for this whole parking, on-street parking and queuing issue for school drop-off. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And if I could follow it up with, if we know we want a multimodal facility, I guess if you had to pick between parking and queuing, what is it? And then are you open to a hybrid approach that accommodates both?
That accommodates parking and queuing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Dave, you're up. I see a hand.
Okay. Is muting off? Can you hear me?
Yep.
So with the diagrams that I previously provided to RJ and the consultants, by my computation, MCDS can accommodate on its own private property about 140 vehicles on up and away into the rear gymnasium parking lot and down to the front near the MCDS office to pick up kids, as well as using the parking lot on the north side. I think, as much as I have an affinity for both Marin Montessori and MCDS and the fantastic academic program that they have, the queuing is really an abuse of the town's right-of-way. and for far too long has created a real dangerous condition on the town's public property. I don't see any way to engineer a grade separated multi-use path on the south side that will benefit MCDS and Marin Montessori and the residents of Robin Drive and accommodate queuing on the south side. Bob, as you know, you were almost killed by a driver who would not give you 3 feet. And the concept of a protected multi-use path on the south side and cars queuing up for MCDS in the afternoon, and a cyclist like yourself trying to utilize that pathway to do the Tiburon loop is just asking for a fatality. There's just no way. Some of those trucks go 50 miles an hour down that path, and cars coming in and out of that queue when there's a multi-use path it cannot, I don't think, be engineered safely. And I think it's really time for the town manager, the town council, the Department of Public Works to sit down with MCDS and give them a drop dead date that says this project's going forward and the queuing on the south side has got to end. So make your plans, invest the money that's necessary. If they need to widen up and away to accommodate more queuing, do whatever you have to do. But the town, I think, needs to give MCDS and Marin Montessori notice that queuing is no longer going to be allowed once this project gets underway.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I think that was pretty clear. Cheryl, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I'm not one to normally speak in favor of parking, but Ring Mountain is a world-class geological site. So I think some accommodation has to be made for people coming some distance from the city, from across the bay to visit Ring Mountain, and will stay several hours and maybe through drop-off and pickup time. So I think that's really an important. We don't, many people here in Corte Madera don't realize what they may have heard of the Tiburon, I think it's the Tiburon lily that's endogenous. It's only a species that's only present there, but the rocks in Ring Mountain are also very, very special. And I also agree with David in terms of the queuing is, I think it's an accommodation the town has made, and as we've heard from Carla, the neighbors have tolerated that and suffered from that. So I think it needs to come to an end.
Okay. Thank you. Mark or Kirby, do you guys have any input on this?
And I'd like to, well, Dave actually asked or stated a factor that I'd like to ask a question about, which is, and I'm of course referring to the trucks and other vehicles going, relatively fast. He said 50 miles an hour. My question is, do we have any plan to, at least during school pickup and delivery, you might say, have illumination signs, which I've seen in other communities, that warn and caution drivers to slow down to X miles an hour? And I don't know what that is, but do we have anything like that?
RJ? I think that was for you.
I don't know that I would, I'm not aware of an illuminated sign, but you do have the school speed limit signs, right? That you see.
Yeah, no, but I'm talking about something a little more emphatic, and I've seen them. Larkspur's got one, as a matter of fact, that just, is a caution light, that it's not in front of or on a crosswalk light, which I say we, all of us have installed, as it were, on our part of the main street. But my point is, do we have anything more emphatic that we can make a great deal more, how shall I say, yeah, emphatic is the word, to people who are using those roads, particularly during pickup, departure and arrival of those cars. And to Dave's point, if we don't have that, I tend to want to favor what he is essentially proposing.
Yeah.
Did you say that last part one more time, Mark? I didn't.
Yeah,
quite
what
catch
I'm
that.
saying is that if we don't have a much more emphatic caution and warning, frankly, to people who are quote speeding. I'm not saying they are speeding, but what I'm saying is that they are driving faster than they should be, even if it's legal, during pickup and delivery times for those two schools. Then I would have to side with Dave on just eliminating south side, queuing. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Kirby, do you have anything else to add, or?
Yeah, I would, first of all, would like to see parking there and would hate to think that somebody got a ticket for parking and hiking in the area because they didn't clear out during the queuing time. Like, I think we need to be considerate of the needs of the schools in terms of the drop off and pickup. That's a real issue, but also per David's suggestion, at least consult with the schools in terms of what facilities they do have that would help alleviate some of the queuing that does exist. But I'm not sure I'm giving clear direction to you one way or the other, but some doubling of a drop off and parking kind of makes sense, but not at the expense of someone getting a ticket. That to me is not a fair trade-off.
Okay. RJ, wait, are there any other BPAC members that want to add to what's already been said? Mark, your hand's still up, but you probably just haven't put it down yet. So RJ, it sounds like what we're hearing is we want to make sure that we allow for parking at Ring Mountain and make sure people are allowed to do that and don't get penalized for that. And we really have got to work with the schools to figure out how to eliminate this queuing issue and try to figure that out. And I think that's really a town council issue more than us. I mean, I think you're just getting direction from us. The council really has to address that and deal with the schools and figure out what they want to do. But is that a fair summation of what was said? I think
that sounds good. And I think we got a lot of great feedback, and I think we can come up with some creative and thoughtful alternatives and obviously kind of move into the next part of the discussion and continue to look at the details. So really appreciate extra time tonight and extra feedback.
Okay. God, I don't even have an agenda up in front of me anymore, but I think, is that it? Are we?
I have it right here.
Pretty much through everything. I lost mine.
Project updates, I think it says next.
So yeah, no project updates tonight. Any items for our next potential meeting?
Anything anybody wants to add?
I just have I guess maybe a request. I was looking at the BPAC website on the town's site, and there are documents and presentations from 2020 that are available. You can download, but there's nothing from 2021 from all of last year. And I would hope that we could keep posting those things, because it's really difficult to understand. The minutes of the meetings are just give a really broad view of what was happening, and obviously we have some detailed discussions. So it would be nice if the RJ, if staff can post presentation documents, the slides from both the consultants and from staff when they're presented to the BPAC. I really appreciate that.
Try to track that down. Are you still able to find the videos?
I
though?
wouldn't expect you to track it all from the past because, but for the future from now on, please.
Thank you.
Okay. David?
The town council, Bob, as you know, approved the 3-foot signage, which is temporary, which will go up in 3 different parts of town. Couldn't be more pleased that that's done. And I'll just remind RJ that, and Chris, I guess, once those signs are printed and the dates are agreed upon for when they go up at various parts of town, they go up and go down, I had volunteered to zip tie them and put them up and take them down on the appropriate dates. And I think that really, well, I'm sure Bob appreciates signage that says must give bicycles 3 feet. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Okay. Thanks for doing that. And I think that's about it. And I'd like to thank all the BPAC members. Long meeting tonight, but thank you for all your really valuable input. That was a difficult issue to work through. And I want to thank all the members of the public. This was, I think, maybe about the best attended meeting we've had. There were a lot of people attending this tonight. You can't really tell that on Zoom, but they were. So thank you and everybody. And with that, we adjourn. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Good night.
Have a good night.
Night.